Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our webinar, Getting Ready to Scale, Addressing U.S. Nuclear Energy Supply Chain Constraints. My name is Maddie Cohen, and I am a project manager at the EFI Foundation and an advisor at the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, or NSI. NSI is a collaboration between the EFI Foundation, Clean Air Task Force, and Nuclear Threat Initiative. Our mission is to help create the enabling ecosystem to scale safe and secure nuclear energy to help satisfy the growing global demand for reliable, cost-effective, carbon-free heat and power. Demand for nuclear energy seems to grow stronger every day. In 2025 alone, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved license extensions for 13 reactors, collectively delivering 12 gigawatts of power to the grid over the next 20 years. Several plants in the US are also embarking on historic restarts after shutting down. And we're also seeing a string of policy commitments across both the state and federal governments. The state of New York committed to adding 4 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity to the state's grid. And in May of last year, one of President Trump's executive orders committed to quadruple nuclear capacity in the United States. So lots of positive signals, but of course, supply chain and workforce readiness represent a critical part of the delivery ecosystem for nuclear energy and for reducing risks associated with new nuclear builds. Given the importance of this topic, NSI wanted to assess the supply chain landscape and our ability to scale. We partnered with our great friends at Solstiss to explore the state of the nuclear energy supply chain and really unpack what are the bottlenecks, opportunities, and pathways that exist to develop a resilient, scalable nuclear energy supply chain. Driven by on-the-ground supplier perspectives, we released a landscape analysis around 1 month ago, and today we're very lucky to have Dylan Allen, the president of Solstiss, here to walk through findings. Following Dylan's presentation, we'll also pivot into a panel discussion where our esteemed group of experts, encompassing both supply and demand side perspectives, will dive deeper into the nuances of the supply chain ecosystem and the opportunities that exist to unlock scaling. Last thing to flag here before we kick it off is the Q&A button. Please feel free to ask any and all questions throughout the course of this conversation in the chat. We will dedicate the last 15 minutes of the discussion with Q&A with the panelists as well as some of our report experts. With all of that said, I am pleased to introduce Dylan Allen, the president of Solstiss, to walk through a brief presentation on our report, Landscape of U.S. Domestic Advanced Nuclear Energy Supply Chain.
Thank you, Maddie, and welcome everyone, and thanks for joining. I want to begin specifically by acknowledging Amelia De Sorrento, the lead author of this body of work, as well as the entire Solstiss and Nuclear Scaling Initiative team. They've meticulously reviewed and shaped this into its final form. And really, the core premise of this report is that the U.S. does not face a technology constraint. Rather, we're facing an acute industrial capacity constraint. So we'll unpack today some of the specific bottlenecks, as Maddie mentioned, across the ecosystem and explore the strategic opportunities to resolve them. When we began this effort, the idea was really barely a whisper, but as we neared completion of the report, the idea of the supply chain capacity constraints had really grown into a roar with some of our recommendations happening in real time. So I'll start by defining the reactors that we looked at in this analysis. We're focusing on the reactors that are really most likely to drive near-term demand for domestic supply chain, broadly in two categories. So the Gen 3 plus light water reactors like the AP1000, the GE X300, relying on mature, proven water-cooled technology. It means that their deployment requires us to reactivate and scale an industrial base that already exists but has eroded over time. And then the second category are the Gen 4 non-light water reactors, like high temperature gas reactors from X Energy or molten salt reactors from Kairos or Terrestrial. These designs are based on earlier reactors, but they've never been deployed at scale. So the Gen 4 designs offer tremendous potential, but really require standing up an entirely new, first-of-a-kind supply chain from scratch. When we think about the global map of the supply chain in the nuclear industry, it becomes immediately clear that the U.S. industry has significant international dependencies. Over the last few decades, production has consolidated among a small number of highly specialized international suppliers. We currently rely heavily on allied nations like Canada, France, Japan, and South Korea for critical needs ranging all the way from uranium mining to the ultra-large steel forgings required for very large reactor pressure vessels. While partnering with trusted allies is a viable and necessary strategy for us, we got to completely eliminate our supply chain dependencies on geostrategic competitors. So that means urgently addressing our reliance on Russia, which controls a massive share of enrichment capacity globally, and China, which dominates the market for some critical advanced reactor materials like nuclear grade graphite, enriched lithium 7, and also tier 2, tier 3 supply of some electronic components. At the center of our supply chain challenges is really a systematic market paralysis. Best described as a chicken and egg deadlock, colloquially. I never thought I'd be able to use chicken and egg in a formal report, but here we are. On the supply side, manufacturers and fuel suppliers are unwilling to make the massive, long lead capital investments required to build new factories without a credible multi-unit demand signal. On the demand side, utilities, hyperscalers, and other customers hesitate to place firm orders for new reactors because they face high execution risk and lack of cost certainty without a proven established supply chain. This self-reinforcing cycle of hesitation actively suppresses investment in our manufacturing capacity and our workforce, effectively blocking the industry from scaling. This market paralysis ripples across the entire nuclear ecosystem, creating severe bottlenecks in really four pillars. First, the fuel cycle. Second, heavy manufacturing and major components. Third are advanced materials and manufacturing techniques within the supporting components. And then finally, our workforce and human capital. Unless these constraints are addressed deliberately and in the right sequence, our renewed nuclear ambitions risk reverting to episodic, bespoke projects rather than sustained fleet deployment. While all of these pillars require attention, our analysis finds that the challenges within the fuel supply chain present the most acute strategic risk to near-term reactor deployment of the Gen 4, while the manufacturing and workforce constraints are broader risks and really are applicable to every design that might be built. So I'll dive in a little bit on some of the specifics. To understand the fuel gap, it's really helpful to briefly review how the fuel cycle works. We frequently think about enrichment, but there's more to it. So we mine raw uranium ore, mill it, and then convert it into a gas, typically uranium hexafluoride or UF6. And then we enrich that gas to concentrate the U-235, the specific uranium isotope that we use to produce energy. And finally, we deconvert it back into a solid powder or metal so it can be fabricated into finished fuel pellets or advanced fuel particles. Currently, our domestic supply chain for standard light water reactor fuel is adequate for the existing fleet, but it's currently expanding to adjust to the recent federal ban on Russian fuel imports. However, for Gen 4 reactors, the fuel cycle has been effectively stalled. Most Gen 4 reactors require high-assay, low-enriched uranium, or HALEU, which is low-enriched uranium that's been enriched all the way up to as much as 20%. So the U.S. currently lacks commercial scale enrichment and deconversion capacity for this material entirely. And furthermore, the advanced fuel fabricators suffer from a severe lack of standardization. Many developers are pursuing bespoke, highly customized fuel forms, which fragments the limited capital that can be deployed across the industry. It slows down regulatory qualification and prevents the industry from achieving much needed economies of scale. Moving on to heavy manufacturing and major components, capacity is heavily constrained by risk aversion in a very domestic supplier base. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. currently has no domestic capacity for the ultra-large forgings required to complete manufacture of the massive reactor vessels, specifically the AP1000. But we are close. There's a real potential to be able to do so with only some minor changes to that vessel. But surprisingly, the most acute bottlenecks are actually downstream from the forging press. The real constraints lie in the highly precise machining, welding, finishing, and rigorous inspection that nuclear components demand. Performing this work requires a special quality assurance program called NQA1, as well as an ASME N stamp certification. And the pool of domestic suppliers maintaining these strict, expensive certifications has shrunk dramatically over the years, largely because the high administrative burden and capital intensity deter companies from entering the market without a guaranteed multi-unit order. Some suppliers have invested in capacity and stand ready to support, but the entire value chain has to come up in scale to meet the projected demand. We're also facing an acute and rapidly growing crisis in our workforce and human capital. The nuclear industry is facing a demographic cliff with a massive wave of highly experienced workers reaching retirement age. In the skilled trades, the pipeline is severely constrained. For every 5 workers retiring from the energy sector, only 1 new worker is entering to take their place. We have a critical national shortage of welders, electricians, and pipe fitters. Almost every vendor that we spoke to in our research listed those 3 as the top. It's compounded by a long-standing societal stigma against vocational trades and a everybody should go to college mindset. In terms of project execution, we estimate roughly 80% of domestic management and construction expertise needed for a consistent nuclear build has been lost since the 80s. We're losing deeply ingrained institutional knowledge, safety culture, and field supervision skills required to successfully deliver complex nuclear megaprojects on time and on budget. We need to actively expand employer-led apprenticeship models in concert with unions. We got to reach students earlier by reinvesting in middle and high school CTE or career and technical education pipelines. Finally, we have to have a massive opportunity to launch reskilling initiatives and establish formal mentorship programs to transfer the priceless hands-on knowledge from our veteran builders before they retire. So how do we break this deadlock and move forward? We've identified several strategic pathways. First, we have to recognize that order books are a prerequisite, not an outcome of supply chain scale. We have to aggregate demand in some way to give suppliers the confidence to build factories with a bankable signal. Second, we need to stop reinventing the wheel. Standardizing fuel forms and components is essential to reduce all the parallel qualification efforts that are necessary that prevent our limited financial and human capital resources from operating on one thing and instead fragmenting. And third, the federal government must step in as a market maker in some places. We've seen positive momentum here, such as the DOE's recent allocation of $2.7 billion in grants to provide domestic uranium enrichment. That's exactly the kind of supply side signal that unlocks private capital. But similarly, decisive public investments will be necessary across other critical nodes, like HALEU deconversion facilities and heavy manufacturing capacity, to really break that market paralysis. Ultimately, the goal is to stop treating every new nuclear plant like a custom bespoke art project. We need to shift our strategy toward repeatable deployments, using those repeated successes to build a rock-solid industrial foundation to rebuild our manufacturing muscle, stabilize our supply base, and train the workforce pipelines for our clean energy future. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to Maddie and Steve. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that excellent presentation, Dylan. And just a reminder for folks to add any questions you may have from the presentation into the chat. And we're now very excited to pivot into our panel discussion. Alex Kaufman unfortunately had to step out of moderating due to a conflict, but we are very lucky to have our very own executive director, Steve Camello, step in and moderate the discussion. Steve is the executive director of NSI and executive vice president at EFI. In addition to steering the NSI ship, Steve leads cross-cutting efforts to accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies and advance innovative financing mechanisms to support a next-generation energy system. Steve will be joined by Jonathan Barr. Jonathan is Flowserve's nuclear segment leader. John leads Flowserve's nuclear strategy and develops commercial partnerships across the global nuclear power industry, driving growth for the existing and new nuclear fleets. John previously served as the White House Assistant Director for Nuclear Energy and brings over 17 years of experience at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Colin Hirschenbach will also be joining our panel. Colin has been employed in the open die, semi-closed die, and seamless rolled ring industry for almost 20 years. He is the manager of sales at North American Forge Masters, a 50-50 joint venture between Scott Forge and Elwood, located in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. This facility is the only facility of its kind in North America where both melting and forging at this scale is performed. And last but certainly not least, Colleen Wright will be joining us. Colleen is the Vice President of New Generation Development for Constellation. Colleen is responsible for the development of enterprise strategy at Constellation and advances new technologies, policies, and business model transformations through partnerships, grants, and research and development. Previously, Colleen worked in several senior roles at Exelon, spanning strategy and government affairs, and also brings more than 5 years of experience at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And with all that said, I will turn it over to Steve for our discussion.
Well, thank you, Maddie. And thanks to our panelists for making time to join this important discussion. Thank you to all people who are tuning in. We really appreciate your attention. And thank you to Dylan and Amelia for all the great work and partnership and putting together the report that is now out. And we had a good presentation, a good brief presentation on its findings. What I'd like to do is actually start the discussion on the demand side. One of the predominant assertions that we have is that for the supply chain and the fuel and the labor to start to show up, you need a durable demand signal. This is what is needed essentially to bring the capital to bear and get that flywheel spinning. Colleen, you're at Constellation, has the largest nuclear reactor footprint in the US. To some extent, you are a postcard from the future, as it were, because if you think about or the nuclear reactor layer cake, as I'd like to call it, there's keeping existing reactors running, life extensions, there's restarts, not too many of those, there's uprates, and then there's building new. Those are all pulls on the supply chain and labor, and you're in the thick of all four layers. Can you talk about the demand signal and how they ramify across all four?
Yeah, so I think you covered it really well. So we operate 21 reactors across 13 states and are a best-in-class operator of nuclear plants, but we also have additional assets as well within our portfolio. And one of the things that we're very focused on is creating a long-term path for viable nuclear power, which includes relicensing our existing plants, providing uprates at our existing sites, restarting our plants, and then looking at building new. And when we think about building new plants, we really think about the opportunity to build new plants adjacent to our existing sites. And those sites are incredible opportunities for new generation development because they de-risk the development of a new nuclear project. The ability to reduce the timeline and risk associated with potential community opposition, NRC licensing reviews. We've got existing assets there with met data for decades. So those sites are a real differentiator for new nuclear development, but it's not quite that easy. So we've got I think the report did a good job of covering the differentiated supply chain and challenges across both Gen 3 Plus and Gen 4 reactors. So we've got a diversified fleet of potential development across those reactor types. We currently operate reactors that are most similar to the Gen 3 Plus fleet, both pressurized water reactors and boiling water reactors. In fact, there's really not a single asset within our fleet that looks exactly like another asset. So in the future, as we think about what we're building and how we're building it, it would be wonderful from a supply chain perspective if there was more consistency across the new fleet of development. But as we think about the challenges for new nuclear development, there are a lot. There's the cost associated with these reactors, the history of the cost overruns, which has created a lot of challenges from an investor perspective for publicly traded companies like Constellation. There's also, the challenges of getting long-term contracts, and that's something that, we're not in a position as Constellation. We operate in merchant markets, so that requires a long-term contract to enable the development of these assets. And then you've got, NRC timelines. And then finally, the supply chain and workforce risks that are really the focus of this report. But we've got a lot of additional challenges within there as we try to figure out how we create the business case to develop one of these reactors in a way that is going to support our investors and our owners, as well as supporting our customers long term and enabling the challenges with scaling AI for political security purposes. So lots of challenges there that I'm looking forward to getting into with the other panelists. But I would also add an additional supply chain constraint across all of this, which is all of the other types of generation that we're trying to concurrently build along with new nuclear. So we're seeing demand signals increase for gas generation, storage, in addition to the construction of data centers, all putting constraints on EPCs and suppliers and labor and workforce as well. So it's not just kind of a microcosm of supply chain constraints on the new nuclear side. We're also facing that additional challenge that is presented because we're in a growth phase of the market here where we're trying to grow all of our generation footprint at the same time, as well as creating those demand markets through the development of new data centers.
That's great. Thank you, Colleen. And you're spot on in highlighting that we are in a growth phase across all the various generation technologies. Plus, when we can get to it, data centers and the grid itself. So just thinking about the array of various skills that are in demand that are being pulled in many different directions, including also oil and gas and LNG as well. There's a lot of overlap in terms of that skill set, just in terms of general construction management and some of the craft labor. Thank you, John. I want to turn it over to you. So you're at Flowserve. I'd like you to give probably 2 to 4 sentences on who Flowserve is and what they do, and then focus your discussion on, given that you're an international supplier, how do you think about scaling and meeting demand that is in growth markets overseas? Compare that to the U.S., where we probably see a little bit more movement overseas. That's my presumption. You can correct me. And then also thinking about what can be done now in terms of scaling before there is a dominant demand signal, say from the U.S. that Colleen rightfully raised.
Thanks for the question, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate here. This is a topic that I always enjoy speaking about with my background coming from sort of the policy and safety and licensing side of the industry, coming now to the supply chain. And so, for those not familiar with Flowserve, we have been in business through many different names for over 200 years, supplying flow control technology and solutions, namely pumps, valves, seals, actuators to many of the world's most complicated industries, from oil and gas, chemical, conventional power, and nuclear has been a major part of it. And so we've been in nuclear ever since the 1950s, working to supply both safety significant and turbine island technology to the global fleet of reactors. We have content in terms of pumps and valves and other things in over 300 reactors across the world. So a really large position there. For primary coolant pumps, probably the single most important flow control technology that we will provide to any nuclear power plant. We have primary coolant pumps to almost 100 different reactors, including boiling water reactors, pressurized water reactors, and pressurized heavy water reactors. We are a publicly traded company on New York Stock Exchange, and so this is an area that has been important for Flowserve, but really has even gotten even more executive support over the past few years as this new nuclear situation has gotten even more attractive, coming from just a couple of years ago where plants were literally going offline prematurely. So, as we look at scaling for the global, deployment of AP1000s, CANDU reactors, SMRs, Gen 3, Gen 4, all different types of reactors, we're doing a lot of things to prepare for that.
And we're in a really good position because we are a global company. We have over a dozen facilities across the world that are supporting nuclear customers right now. And so even in the US, where we've seen, still this hesitancy to order new units by utilities, we're working with EDF in France. We're working with, in the UK, in Korea, all over Europe and Asia, supporting a lot of these big programs. And so we're moving on this. The other thing is we're also supporting a lot of the operating reactors as they go through their life extensions. The uprates, refurbishments are a really big effort in Canada for the CANDU reactors as well. So we're very active in that, and we have I was preparing for a meeting with Westinghouse, a separate one with Westinghouse and one with Bruce Power, two of our most important partners in this. And they were all asking me, John, how do you have the confidence that you're going to be ready to support all of our ambitions and when it comes to, supporting the existing units and all these new units? And I came up with a list of about 10 things to answer that. And so I'm not going to go through all those right now because that will take up too much time. But ultimately, like, we have capacity right now. We have plans in place to expand that capacity, and there's so many things we can do to expand capacity before we actually have to make large capex investments and actually build new facilities or make roofline expansions. And so, investing in critical machinery that are constraints in the process. Adding second shifts for some of the most important positions. Outsourcing non-core manufacturing from some of our key facilities to other facilities because we have that global footprint. It gives us that flexibility to do that. And so those are just a few of the examples. Another really big one for us is also managing our sub-suppliers too. And so we have elevated how we're working with them to make sure that they're ready to support us going forward. So I'll pause there, but I can keep going on that if you want.
John, that's very helpful. I just want to have a quick two-finger follow-on question, which is, yes, you can expand all this capacity before there's this big glut of an order book, but this is all predicated on business still coming through, right? I don't believe that you would take speculative expansion lightly. There would have to be some form of demand in terms of from existing internationally, let's say, for you to have confidence to go and expand capacity, even if it doesn't require a roofline extension.
That's exactly right. And the other thing this also involves is really elevating our partnerships with our partners. So that, whereas things used to be happen on from a sales manager on Flowserve side with a counterpart on the other side, things are now going up through our executive team as we're building these partnerships to ensure that we both have that visibility into the forward demand plans and the existing capacity and how we're going to work together to do that. Especially when everyone else is aware that, so many other nuclear operators and developers and EPCs are working on their plans at the same time. So
that's great. Thank you. And so I just want to reemphasize that, yes, there are various clock speeds to various components, various labor and fuel elements that you can bring online in response to demand, but it's in response to some demand somewhere in the world. So demand basically is the captain that is the chain captain, as I like to say. Colin, over to you. You build very large stuff, ultra large forgings, and if at the cocktail level conversation, we always hear that the U.S. doesn't have the capacity, especially for the very big stuff that's needed for, say, AP1000. And then even if we did have the capacity, we may not be cost competitive. First, what I'd like you to do before dispelling my purposely ignorant introduction is can you define the difference between capability and capacity when it comes to forging?
Yeah, sure, Steve. I appreciate the question. Again, thanks for having me here today. That's a pretty simple answer, right? Capability is, can you build the first one? Can you make the first head or the shell? And obviously capacity is, okay, how many of them can you make within a certain amount of time, right? So we can speak today about, capability. We've got the capability to make almost all the major forgings, including almost all for the AP1000. But really, the discussions that are now having place that a lot of the developers are asking, and this started middle of last year, was how many of them can you make? When the orders start to flow, how much capacity do you have to deliver X amount of shells or X amount of heads, right? And that's where it becomes very, very tricky because you don't know, when the orders might come from who, how much, and then when, the deliveries would be.
Excellent. And can you tell me a little bit more about American competitiveness, what you're thinking in terms of capacity expansions that might be needed depending on, an order book size? And I would believe that the existing capacity that you already have is not sitting idle. It's being used by other industries.
Yeah, so real quick before I answer the capacity, I want to step back and from a capability standpoint, right? We started this conversation. NAF is a 50-50 joint venture between Scott Forge, a 100% employee-owned company going back to 1893, and our other partner, Elwood Group, which is a fifth generation family-owned, incorporated in 1910. So it was actually 11 years ago where these two private companies, Elwood and Scott, decided to make a nine-digit, couple $100 million investment to bring the heavy melting, heavy forging capability back to North America. So we're really proud of that, and we're really proud of our Newcastle facility about an hour north of Pittsburgh, where it is the only facility in North America where we're melting and forging up to that large scale, again, including AP1000. So, those are the big pieces of the puzzle. The capacity, how many things can you make, are some of the smaller pieces that kind of fill in the rest of the picture. So, obviously to build the first one, you need the melting, the forging, the heat treatment, the overhead cranes, the fork trucks, and we've added large machine tools, right, to machine those heads, machine those shells. So that's really, as the report does a really good job identifying, depending on when the orders do come, it's adding that additional machining capacity to try to keep up with the demand in addition to some other tertiary value adds like non-destructive ultrasonic examination. So we've kind of greased the skids as much as we could. We've got approval to expand up to another 500,000 square feet at one of our facilities where we do that machining. So we don't have to keep going back to the village and asking for permits. But again, as you kind of had asked John, right? You're not going to go out and buy a $15 million gantry mill or a couple $6.5 million vertical turret lathes without a written commitment that the work would follow because those are terribly expensive assets, and you're going to want to use that installed capacity. We do have some capacity still today, right? We want to take care of those customers that are actively buying large forgings from us right now, and we'll continue to serve them. But as it stands right now, there's still some capacity in that space for some of those first movers, some of those first contracts.
Right. And you deal primarily with what we call long lead items, right? That these are, in fact, if they are not ordered at the right time, then essentially they exist on the critical path for a new construction. So you need some headspace to know in what time frame you need to gear up, and you really hope that those long lead item I guess, orders persist, that they're not essentially canceled, or if they are canceled, that someone else takes that spot. And so it would seem that you need quite a durable order over multiple years to give you that confidence to make that capital investment.
Yeah, that's correct, Stephen. I mean, at this threshold, millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions, you need that firm commitment to move forward in time, right? We've taken it as far as we could on our own to be prepared. The capability, can you make the first one, is there here domestically. Again, it's a capacity discussion, how many when the orders start to come. So we're ready for the first couple. Today is the beginning of the week. It's a Tuesday. If we needed to, we could be making a 300,000. We could melt the ingot on Thursday, 2 days from now, and forging that large shell Monday of next week if we had to for a customer, assuming all the paperwork was in place.
Right. Sometimes the paperwork takes a little bit longer than the physics of actually deformation of iron, right?
Sometimes.
Um, I just want to remind the audience, and we already have about 10 good questions that are coming through. We're going to switch to audience Q&A at minute 42, so in about 6 minutes or so. And then at that time also, I'm going to ask Dylan and Amelia and Maddie to come back on because it seems like the breadth of the questions could be answered by multiple voices. But Colleen, coming back to you and the idea of the long lead item orders, what needs to be true to give you that kind of confidence to think about putting in these orders for these long lead items, knowing that essentially they're critical path items if you don't think about it ahead of time?
Yeah, long lead items are one of the several poles in the tent to try to develop a viable new nuclear project. For us, at our core, we're trying to identify a financeable path to deployment. So that is anchored on having a long-term contract with a customer, a site, and frankly, a path to drive the project forward. Um, More challenging than maybe anticipated, largely because what we're talking about here, if you think about an AP1000, is we're talking about an $20 billion project that can take 10 years to build and will have an asset life of 80 years. So this isn't, the refrigerator that you buy at Lowe's today. This is a long-term asset that's going to, provide power for generations of families, communities, and businesses. And that looks a lot like our existing assets. But as I think John brought up, it wasn't, or maybe Colin, it wasn't so long ago that we were talking about shutting down our existing assets. So these durable demand signals, when you're looking out a build period that could be upwards of 10 years, and the uncertainty associated with the cost profile and the scalability of these projects, it is 100% chicken and egg. Like as challenging as it is to use those terms for every technology deployment problem we have in the US and the scalability of the supply chain, that's just the case here. So we're really focused on how do we create that path for a deployable, financeable project that we can allocate capital and support the deployment of. Um, that's quite challenging. So we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox, but there remain substantial challenges to get to that place. Among which are, the supply chain is part of that. But um, yeah,
It's a broader issue.
a
Yeah.
broader issue. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it's very challenging.
John, last question from me before I we ask other people to
Mhm.
uncloak themselves, and we'll move into the Q&A from the audience. Um, one element that came up in the report is advancements in manufacturing and material science, and the kinds of um, products and components that you create are predicated on cheap, repeatable, and available materials to go into the various um, items that you uh, offer. To what extent are you seeing those as bottlenecks in the suite of products that you offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for a company like Flowserve, we are supplying so many different types of components to nuclear power plants, some with the tightest safety requirements, some with less because they're on the power conversion island of a plant. And so we are always looking for the best strategy to make sure that we meet the customer requirements for quality and timeliness, but also do it in a way that is really competitive in cost over the entire life of the asset. Um, for some of the more advanced modern manufacturing techniques, those are things that we're looking into for certain applications. I would just say over the broad spectrum of our nuclear business, it's not really a huge focus right now for a lot of things, and that kind of connects to the question about when we think about launching AP1000s. I mean, that one of the big benefits of that is that there is an existing supply chain. And so
Hmm.
we have existing pumps and valves that are qualified for those. And so, when Westinghouse is looking for suppliers, they're not looking for them to reinvent their components. They're looking for they're more interested in can you provide the same thing meeting their requirements, on schedule, on budget, over and over again. And so we're always looking into that, but we're sort of balanced between all the different needs that the customer and partner has.
Excellent. Thank you.
There are, and I'll add a little bit, in some of we're also very active supporting several of the Gen 4 SMR developers. And so we have a fair amount of experience with sodium and molten salt applications, both in nuclear and in other industries too, like concentrated solar. And so those are areas where we're doing a lot of, using some of our top engineers to really make
Mhm.
sure that we have the products for pumps and valves that are going to be critical for the safety of those assets. And the smaller the reactor, the more important it is for them to achieve cost reductions with volume. And so we're always balancing that as well.
Right. The economies of scale versus economies of series, age-old question. Thank you. Um, Amelia, Maddie, if you can enter the arena. We now have 13 questions from the audience, and um, probably Amelia, Dylan, this one is for you. It's from Anna McCoy. Thank you for your question, and I'll read it. Um, as demand accelerates, are we being too rigid in defining qualified, that's in quotes, qualified nuclear talent? And what would it take to confidently expand the workforce beyond traditional nuclear backgrounds without increasing risk? Dylan and Amelia, do you want to take that? And then we can open up to others. Maybe Colin, you probably want to opine on that.
Sure, I'll jump in on that. I promise I did not pay Anna to plant that question. Um, so new to nuclear is a very big thing, especially in the utility context when you have folks who have never worked in a nuclear environment working at a nuclear power plant that's operational. It's a big risk in the mind of management, and you want to minimize that. But you have to invest in the future of your workforce, or you will only have the people who have worked in nuclear power before. Um, and so I'm a huge proponent of bringing people into the nuclear industry, look for ways to bring new to nuclear people to the job, put them on work that is a little bit more distant from the core at first until they can learn the safety practices, what a safety conscious work environment is, where you're expected to speak up, even if your boss is telling you something, if you know it's wrong. And you think that there's a safety issue or an incorrect technical issue, you're expected to speak up because the right way is more important than the authoritative dictate of a leader. So I believe we should be bringing folks in and letting them get experience in the environment, whether it's in the manufacturing environment. Manufacturing, just the Flowserve and NAF, they do not put out low quality things that aren't made with nuclear. They just have a lot more paperwork to describe that the product was produced with the quality they say it was to be nuclear qualified. So a nuclear qualified person absolutely is just very similar to the components. It's a person who has gone and done the things in the nuclear space, and I think we need to have a huge push to be bringing new faces into the market. Amelia?
Yeah, and plus one to all of that, and structurally, one way to do that, particularly in the trades, because as Dylan mentioned, for every one new entrant to the trades, we're seeing five retirees. Increasing the apprentice ratios and working with EPCs and with owners to incentivize getting more apprentices on site is one kind of tactical way to start to move the needle.
Colin, John, any additional
Yeah, I
comments?
would say, Dylan did a really good job capturing on this, right? But you don't dip your toe into nuclear, right? If you're a new, I'm absolutely supportive of more entrants entering the nuclear supply chain, whether that's, what I do for a living or what John does, making the stuff, if you will. But the companies that do that, you have to be fully committed, right? You need the front end of the business and the back end of the business. You need to support all those different departments so that you can be successful. And I'll just speak from my own experience. We do see whether it's the developers or tier one, tier twos like Flowserve, like the customer's gonna have to hold the hand of that new vendor and help them be successful, right? And not set them up for failure knowingly or unknowingly. There is, examples, Westinghouse has one where they had a vendor in Europe that they had to go in and buy, right? They were historically in oil and gas, got over their skis, and got involved in Westinghouse, and they had to buy that company to assure supply. But as the new nuclear continues to develop, there's going to have to be new entrants to make people successful, but just being methodical about how you slowly ease into that a little bit at a time. How do you eat a whale? It's one bite at a time sort of mentality.
John, any additions? Thank you, Colin.
I think you all covered it really well. Some of our key nuclear facilities, for example, like in Raleigh, North Carolina, Lynchburg, Virginia, it's really important to have good relationships with local schools, whether like at the NC state level, the local trade schools. Also looking at former, Navy nuclear personnel. There's lots of different good pipelines for talent, but they're not enough. And so that is a really important constraint.
Yes, and let's remind our daughters that careers in the trades and in manufacturing are a great path because right now we're missing out on 50% of the workforce by not encouraging women to consider these types of careers. That in the age of AI, I mean, I have a daughter who's going into electrical, and I couldn't be more thrilled because those are good jobs.
Well put, Amelia. Thank you. Um, I I will alone address Rob Fife, your question. Multiple references to a report. There was a report, and it is publicly available. It's on the nuclearscaling.org or the Nuclear Scaling Initiative website. Check it out. It is the basis for this discussion. Sticking with workforce and the intersection of workforce and innovation, I thank you, Harry Andreas, for your question, which I will read. Open to all panelists. Are you considering any new technologies or innovations that can reduce capacity or human resource bottlenecks? For example, advanced manufacturing, automated or robotic inspection, advanced construction, site scanning, Colleen, even when it comes to thinking through some of the licensing, anything where we can deploy robots to make our lives easier. Open to anybody.
I can add in our Raleigh facility, we've added some robotic welding machines that have been very helpful to improving quality. So that's an easy one. So absolutely.
Is that something that needs to be qualified in any way? How is it just a manual for machine swap? What does that look like?
That's a good question. I probably have to phone a friend to our director in Raleigh to talk about that one with more experience than me since I've joined just over a year ago. But I'll have to come back on that one.
Great.
And
Good.
I'll put on my EPRI Advanced Nuclear hat for a second, and I think I saw Kevin from the EPRI Advanced Nuclear Tech team on here. There's a whole work stream of advanced manufacturing that EPRI is investigating, qualifying new processes, looking for ways to actually go execute the work more effectively. I think I saw another question that's related, ways to utilize AI, not just to, like a Google, but utilizing AI to find efficiencies in construction schedules, find outliers in estimates. So really looking at ways to use AI the tool that it can be to go find the things that you just can't see because the data set is so large, collapse that and bring those highlights. So all the way from the construction management aspect all the way down to automated manufacturing processes, which there's some pretty cool stuff that EPRI's working on. So for those in the industry, check that out.
We talk a lot about dependencies on China, Russia, et cetera, in this report. But I think in advanced manufacturing, we are really right now falling behind compared to China. Was reading about how in China they have fully dark, non-lit factories because everything's being done by robots. I'm sure Colin and Jonathan have smarter things to say on this. But this is certainly an area where, if we want to stay ahead, I'm very excited about the recent funding announcement for Project Prometheus using AI for manufacturing. I certainly hope that we as an industry look to what others are doing in other industries to continue to automate and leverage recent technology to improve processes, improve manufacturing, especially in a world where labor is a critical constraint, and we continue to see that. And that's something that came up over and over again as we were doing interviews with folks like Colin, Jonathan, and many of you that are on here. If you don't have the people, you can't produce the products.
Thank you, Amelia. Colleen, anything that you'd like to add on this dimension?
Yeah, I'm not as in the weeds on how we're using, advanced tools or robots within our existing operations. So would have to touch base with our operational team on those questions. But we are looking at AI use cases as it relates to nuclear core optimization as well as licensing applications. So there are a lot of, EPRI is doing an incredible amount of amazing work, and we're a partner with EPRI on a lot of nuclear innovations. But we're also looking at the startup ecosystem as well, companies like Everstar and others that are looking to build out, AI tools for licensing development, both new licensing renewals, et cetera. So excited about the potential of those to also enable the speed and time to market.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another question, and Colleen, this one's for you. At least you're going to start this one. It's from Iftikhar. What specific mechanisms could create credible demand signals strong enough to unlock supplier investments? Are we talking about long-term offtake agreements, government-backed guarantees, standardized reactor designs, or something else? And which of these is most realistic in the next 3 to 5 years?
Okay, I would love to say that there's one silver bullet here, but there's not. So we're talking about risk management when we're talking about building new large reactors. And so that risk comes from multiple different areas of focus. So a long-term contract from a customer can support and enable financing for a project, but there's still the risk of cost overruns from construction enablement. So what kinds of terms and agreements can EPCs agree to on the construction timelines? Is the supply chain capable of delivering on that timeline? We hear a lot of comparatives to, well, why can't we do this as fast as China can do it? We're missing a lot of components that enable China to, I think their fastest construction timeline was around 4 years or so. We're missing a lot of those key components. So a lot of the activities, both state and federal level, are aimed at targeting those risks and trying to mitigate them. But it is an incredibly challenging and sizable risk to manage. So it's not just one piece of that we're managing or one, action from the federal government or a customer that's going to solve that. And I think that's why you see lots of activities happening in the market, but very few announcements. So, we haven't quite gotten the right package, the right puzzle pieces to enable that first mover. And I'm pretty confident that every utility out there wants to be an nth of a kind deployment, but nobody wants to be the first of a kind deployment. Nobody wants to take on that risk that, would expose investors and owners and customers to, the risk of cost overruns that can be quite substantial and potentially lead to stranded investments as well. So, if we can get across that kind of first of a kind, second of a kind, third of a kind, into the nth of a kind, I think you see a lot more risk management comfort with that exposure. But as it stands today, not only are we facing kind of supply chain risks that John and Colin have talked a lot about, and Dylan as well, but you're also facing a lot of these other risks associated with deploying these projects. So from a customer perspective, we do see a lot of customers interested in new nuclear and focused on that. But they're looking at the time to market, right? So confidence on delivery at a certain date is one challenge. Confidence on cost is another challenge. So do they have enough certainty into the demand signal from their internal demand to make those commitments 10 years out? And if that demand signal say if they need the power earlier, if they need it later, or if there's a delay in the project, how are they going to manage that delay? So, we're talking about a whole kind of slew of different risks. No silver bullet, unfortunately, but we're all working together as an industry and with federal, state partners, supply chain partners, EPCs, trying to figure it out. So, never has there ever been so much momentum to make this successful. So, lots of confidence and hope that
That's a
we'll get
plus.
there.
Yeah, that's a plus. Thank you. That was an excellent answer. John, you might be the last word because we're coming up on the hour. So please, it's yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. I actually want to follow Colleen's comments there and mention, we are really encouraged by what we're hearing and seeing from leadership at the Department of Energy in Washington. In fact, I was there with our CEO just a couple weeks ago, meeting with their leadership about all these plans, what they're working on, and letting them know how ready we are to get moving on this. So again, we are really encouraged there. Also, a lot of the states as well, especially here in Texas. Really encouraged by what's going on here as well. Um, that being said, I mean, I think we're in a really, many of the suppliers here are in a very good position to get moving. Can we, if all this comes together at the same time, can we do it? Of course not. But for the near term, for the life extensions, the power upgrades, refurbishments, restarts, new AP1000s, Gen 3 SMRs, Gen 4 SMRs, I think we're in a good position to get moving on these. So we're encouraged.
A positive end note, which also will overshadow the one negative element in this, which is I'm sorry to the audience members that we couldn't get to your questions. They were great. There was a lot of them, but there's only so much time. But I want to thank the panelists for a great discussion and a lot of energy around this topic. Greatly appreciated. Maddie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your time, attention, and great questions on today's webinar. I also echo Steve's thanks to our panelists. The discussion was excellent, and we got a lot of great insights. As the panelists pointed out, the conversation on nuclear has changed a lot since just a few years ago. As such, demand signals are incredibly important for all parties partaking in the scale-up of nuclear energy. If you're interested in learning more about the report and NSI's work, please visit our website, nuclearscaling.org, or find us on LinkedIn. This is the first of several supply chain analyses and conversations that we have planned for this year. So please do stay connected. And I really appreciate all the emojis as well. So thank you all so much again for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.